You talk about, Graham, in your book, and I find this to be a very, very exciting segment, that a light being switched on the human brain all around the world, more or less at the same time. Explain that, because I don't quite figure it out.
Well, it's not so much a question of a light being. It's more a metaphor that I'm using. I'm saying that there's a certain moment in human prehistory when it seems as though a light has been literally switched on, like somebody flipped a switched on in the human brain all over the world. And this was the one of the mysteries that drew me into this inquiry. Because if you look at what anthropologists call the human career, the whole story of the human race, you have a story that's roughly 6 million years long, back to the last common ancestor with the chimpanzee, when our line diverged from our very close relatives, the chimpanzee. And really, and unfortunately, this is a story of 6 million years of boredom. Our ancestors do absolutely nothing. As time gradually passes, we find from the few remains in the fossil record that they're beginning to look more and more like us. They start off about 3 feet tall as adults, with tiny, tiny brains, even smaller than the brains of a chimpanzee. And gradually, over the millions and millions of years, they get taller, they get more upright, they perfect walking on 2 legs, their brow ridges begin to recede, the brain size gets bigger and bigger. By 500,000 years ago, our ancestors have brains exactly the same size as ours, and by 200,000 years ago, they are fully anatomically modern in every sense. There's a skeleton from Ethiopia dating to 196,000 years ago, which is in every sense identical to a modern human being. You wouldn't blink if you passed this individual in the street. He looks exactly like you or I. And brain casts tell us that their brain size was identical to ours. The brain was organized in the same way as ours. We're dealing with us. Genetically, they're identical to us. And yet, despite looking like us and being genetically identical to us, these beings of 200,000 years ago don't behave like human beings at all. They behave like shuffling, tool-using apes. They have no religion, no culture, no art, no lateral thinking. They're really bad hunters. It's amazing that they managed to survive for millions of years.
As long as they did, yeah.
Yeah, they have no broader wisdom whatsoever. They just seem to live for the moment and incredibly dull. So although we might not bat an eyelid if we pass them in the street, they would certainly send us to sleep if we listen to them at a dinner conversation. And this goes on for more than another 100,000 years, and it's really, you have to really come down until just 40,000 years ago, or even less, 35,000 years ago, when suddenly, all over the world, you get evidence that a tremendous change has taken place in this being. It's as though something has been done to our ancestors. And suddenly, almost out of the blue, we are creating the most extraordinary, transcendent art that the world has ever seen. And this is the art of the painted caves of southern Europe and of the rock shelters of places like South Africa and Australia. You find the art in North America and in South America, always painted on rocks or in caves. And you know, the famous cave of Lascaux in France, which dates back about 20,000 years. When Pablo Picasso, the great artist, entered that cave in the 1930s, when he came out, he was interviewed by reporters, and he just stood there amazed. And he said, you know, we have invented nothing. That these people of so long ago were creating this just amazing world-class art. And the mystery is that they do it absolutely out of nowhere. 1 minute they are these shuffling ape men. They look like us, but their behavior is that of ape men. The next minute they are producing works of art that stunned Pablo Picasso. And this is the mystery as to why did this light switch on in our brains. And I think the clue to that mystery, the answer to that mystery, is found in the art itself, because an absolutely universal characteristic of this mysterious rock and cave art all around the world is that it features those beings that I mentioned in the last segment that are technically referred to as therianthropes, part animal, part human beings. They're in a state of transformation between human and animal. So you see a man with the head of a bison and the hooves of a bison. You see the figure of a woman who the woman is actually depicted headless, but the head of a lion is emerging from her arm. So this is not a question of people being dressed up in skins. This is a question of actual transformation, a shape-shifting, transforming being. And these are the very earliest paintings that we have from anywhere in the world, are these paintings of beings that can only be described as supernatural beings, because we do not encounter beings like that in everyday life. These were not paintings from nature. These artists were depicting something that they had seen and that had a very powerful impact on them. And I believe that's exactly what happened, that they cultivated altered states of consciousness, perhaps at first by accident.
How do we know they weren't just hallucinating, Graham?
Well, you see, this is the crucial question, because we have to try to understand what hallucinations are. The phenomenon called hallucinations, or visions, if you like, is very poorly studied. There was work that was done on this during the 50s and 60s, and then with the tremendous hysteria that accompanied the war on drugs, when just all drugs were lumped together in one category and called bad, the work that psychiatrists had been doing with hallucinogens and human volunteers, which allow us to directly study this mystery, was stopped. And in fact, that work wasn't started again until the 1990s, and perhaps we'll come on later to a discussion of Rick Strassman's incredible work with dimethyltryptamine and DMT. But the point is this: we actually don't know what hallucinations are. Many scientists just dismiss them as wanderings of the mind and say they're absolutely meaningless, that in an altered state of consciousness, the individual is bizarrely stitching together elements from his or her personal memory and imagination, and these are what hallucinations are. Absolutely no evidence for that theory whatsoever, and a great deal that contradicts it, most notably that in these altered states of consciousness, particularly those that are induced by shamanic plants and other shamanic techniques, people from all different cultures and all different parts of the world and all different periods of time all seem to encounter the same other world, inhabited by the same incredible supernatural beings who have teachings to give us. They may do strange and terrifying things to us, but they always also teach us. And that is true in the latest incarnation of this phenomenon, which is the alien abduction phenomenon. Hallucinations are a kind of perception. We don't even understand everyday perception. We don't understand how, we do, of course, understand the lenses of the eye, but we do not understand how this 3 or 4 pounds of jelly inside our skulls that we call our brains transforms light rays into consciousness, into experiences, into emotions. We don't understand how that happens at all. And it's well understood that every perception is affected by the culture and the background of the individual who has those perceptions. I believe the same is true for hallucinations. They are another form of perception, particularly as cultivated by shamans. They are another form of perception, and they also are affected by our cultural background. So what happens is that as these experiences are undergone in different cultures, the culture imposes itself on those experiences. You get slight regional variations as a result of different cultures, but the astonishing thing is that at root, everybody is seeing the same thing. And this is incredibly hard to explain. If the idea is that this imagery is hardwired into our brains in some way by genetics, by evolution, then we have almost a bigger mystery as to how it got there. But for me, the most elegant and the most satisfactory explanation, and one that increasing numbers of scientists who work with altered states of consciousness are coming to consider, is that what happens to us in an altered state is that the receiver wavelength of our brains is retuned, allowing us to gain access to other dimensions, perhaps the very dimensions that quantum physicists speak so much about these days, allow us to get into those dimensions, to contact and to deal with their inhabitants. And this is what shamans do every day of the week.
Now, the mere fact that this